Bloody Vegans, you're very welcome to it. Each week I'll be travelling ever deeper into the world of veganism, discovering along the way a multitude of viewpoints from the political and ethical to the practical. I'll be doing this through a series of conversations, each aiming to further illuminate my understanding and hopefully yours of all things plant-centric. And this week is no different. I'm going to be chatting with Shaun Woodward, schoolteacher, vegan activist, Green Gazelles player, fitness coach, you name it. He does loads of stuff, does Shaun. And he's a fantastic chap. We're going to be chatting about all kinds of subjects, from vegan capitalism to what kind of activist methodology works and doesn't work. And I'm not sure we come up with a definitive answer on all those things, but it's certainly an interesting conversation and absolutely got me thinking in lots of different directions. So hopefully it will you too. But I suppose it's worth mentioning, actually, this is the 52nd episode of the Bloody Vegans podcast. So a year ago, I set out on this. We talk about this, actually. I don't know the word journey, but we're set out on this journey to share all kinds of interesting vegan viewpoints. Hopefully with lots of different people, and 52 episodes down the road, I think we're doing okay so far. Hopefully you do too, and just a huge thank you to everybody who has listened to episodes of the podcast and subscribes, and if you've left a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast, that's really appreciated as well. So a huge thank you to everyone for listening. So without further ado, let's get on to the business in hand, which is the conversation between myself and Shaun Woodward.
Yeah, of course, man. So it was about between 5 and 6 years ago now. So I, at the time, was doing my teacher training, and I read this story to my class at the time about this boy that lived in the countryside, and the premise of the book was it had an environmental twist. So each sort of page, something in the environment changed, like a new road or a new building, and it sort of progressed from there. And by the end of the story, he was living in a huge city right in the middle, surrounded by factories, waste, rubbish. So a massive contrast to what he was living in before. And from what I remember, the message at the end of the story was that we all have a responsibility to look after the planet. And it just got me thinking, really. And I stumbled upon an article. It was pretty much like within that same evening, and I stumbled upon this article that suggested that eating one beef burger was equivalent of not showering for like 2 months, I think. And I was like, that definitely can't be right, because at the time I was eating a lot of animal products, and it just got me thinking. And then ended up watching Cowspiracy. That was quite a big documentary at the time, and that had an environmental focus as well. And pretty much from there, it made me actually realise that maybe the choices that I was making, dietary choices, weren't the best. And then that led to watching Earthlings, and I think Blackfish at the time, which was more about animal entertainment at SeaWorld specifically, I think. And then from that point on, within that 24 hours time frame, I could not see myself not being vegan. So that was pretty much it. I still had a freezer full of chicken and loads of other animal products, and I just couldn't bring myself to eat them. My whole family thought, I told them, and they, thought it was a joke. At the time, I was still buying boxes of animal products for Muscle Food. So yeah, it was a massive shift in sort of mindset and a lifestyle really. So that was pretty much my journey into it. I didn't really have a plan at the time, so the meals that I was sort of putting together early on were very, very simple. Basically just salads really. Not really thinking too much about nutrition. So that kind of came a bit later really, once I'd sort of realised that I needed to make a bit more of a plan. A very, very quick journey into it.
It's intriguing to me that you mentioned like the muscle foods and stuff, and having a freezer full of chicken and all that kind of stuff. You're clearly into kind of the health and fitness side of things at the time, and the perceived wisdom of what great nutrition is, from the mainstream, is you eat loads of chicken and you buy stuff from Muscle Foods and all that sort of stuff. Like, were you at all concerned about that? Did you, I appreciate, like, morally and ethically you kind of felt, okay, the switch is made, and it was a 24-hour transition. But was there an element of you that was like, well, okay, well, I'm going to have to give up all the health and fitness side? Or did you think, well, there must be a route, I just don't know what it is yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, I didn't even really think about that. I mean, I've always been into exercise, and the health and fitness, even from being a teenager and even earlier than that. But yeah, I just assumed it would work. I didn't, my knowledge of sort of nutrition from a vegan, plant-based sort of point of view now is so much more advanced than it was back then. But I just assumed it would work. I didn't even really know that vegan athletes were a thing, really. So I kind of almost just hoped it would work, and just assumed it would. And then over time, it was apparent that it would be absolutely fine. And actually, I was probably overdoing it with all the protein back then, massively overdoing it. So yeah, that's definitely something that was in my mind at the time.
As you've kind of gone on the journey of learning, and like you say, your knowledge base is increased dramatically over the sort of 5 or 6 years that you've been vegan, and are a fit and healthy and strong, very capable chap now. Like, would you say that like your knowledge has got you to a place that you were as good athletically as you were before, better, or or not quite where you were, but you're happy with it from an ethical standpoint?
Yeah, in some ways, I think athletically, obviously I'm a bit older now, but now I do feel a lot more capable. Right now I'm doing a bit of mountain biking every other week. My main sort of thing at the moment is sort of lifting weights, but at the moment, really, I'm not really too concerned with sort of high performance. I just want to be athletic and healthy. Back then, I'd had a couple rugby injuries. I had surgery like a few years before I went vegan. So I kind of slowed down a little bit. But since making the transition, especially over the last couple of years, I do feel a lot more capable in that sort of field, especially lifting weights, and it's more the recovery really, which is strange because obviously my protein intake has gone down, and that's one thing that I say to a lot of people is you don't need as much protein as you're made to believe or that you think. So that has definitely been an interesting factor making that transition to veganism.
Do you think like the you talk about like we don't need necessarily as much protein as we might think. Do you think that from a marketing standpoint, that even within the vegan community, or well, not even with the vegan community, but with as big brands are trying to jump upon the vegan bandwagon, if you like, then you're seeing vegan protein being kind of slapped on things. Do you think it's necessarily a problem insofar as is it actually educating people that veganism is a healthy way to live? And I'm just talking about veganism from a nutritional standpoint, obviously at the moment. That it's teaching people that it's a healthy lifestyle. Or do you think it's just sort of the same narrative as it was before, just with vegan written on it?
Yeah, there is definitely. I mean, even in the last couple of years, I mean, there's definitely way more vegan protein based products, or or that advertising has been increased, and I think I don't know how healthy that is, because it does sort of the narrative shouldn't really be, oh, just eat loads of protein and you'll be fit and healthy and strong. It doesn't quite work like that, but making the shift to veganism, I've gone through phases of just really eating whole foods and not really bothering about protein, shakes and the sort of mock meats that are high in protein, and just eating whole foods has probably even improved my performance, just because the availability of the micronutrients. It's definitely something that I try and get people to think about. And personally, I lately I've tried to really cut down on those sort of protein based shakes and the mock meats. I don't think we need them as much as people make out, really.
Yeah, it'd be good to get your view on those generally, actually, because I think there's a lot of angles to the mock meat thing. There's the nutritional side. Is it actually a healthy thing to have? And I suppose also the monetization element of it. You've got big brands, the KFCs and so on, cashing in on that. What's your view on the health of that from a personal level, and then the health of it from the vegan community point of view? How useful do you see it?
So I think the mock meats from like supermarkets can be like a really good way of making people realize that they can still have the foods that they would usually have, and if you compare them to, I guess, the animal based version, I would say the vegan version is going to be healthier. But I've especially over the last at least 3 years, I've gone more towards like an 80%, 20% split. So 80% whole foods and 20% more processed foods, just for like a mental health enjoyment side of things. Not that I don't enjoy whole foods, I really do. It's just sometimes it's nice just to have a vegan burger or a vegan pizza, something like that perhaps nutritionally it's not the best. I think most people probably realize that, but sort of, from like a energy point of view or like a mental health point of view, it does help. And it gets, it moves us away from this, this restriction. If you're only eating whole foods all the time, sometimes it can be quite tricky. So that's the kind of the sort of plan that I follow in terms of like fast food places. I don't really tend to bother with places like KFC or when they brought out their vegan burger, I wasn't really attracted to it, just because personally I find I feel quite uncomfortable supporting large chains like that. But I think for maybe someone that's maybe vegan curious, or perhaps from like an environmental point of view, those options, we could argue definitely are, well, they are better than the animal-based version. Yeah, it's definitely something that I've thought about, those sort of big chains offering vegan options, whether they're just cashing in on a trend or they actually genuinely care. I've asked myself that question quite a few times, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think I'm with you. I don't want to be. I often think your cash is again our current sort of capitalist society. Your cash is a vote, and wherever you place that vote is what you're voting for. And KFC, for example, is not a business that I particularly want to vote for the sort of the rest of the destruction it would cause and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of with you on that, but I do think, I don't know, there's this transitional point, isn't there, about if somebody non-vegan walks into there, here's the hype, tries it, is there an argument to say that they the next week try something else vegan, and the next week and that point that you made there about, do they then not associate veganism with restriction, which is what they might have associated with it before. When you hear mainstream sort of non-vegan folks talk to you about veganism, they often talk about what you're not going to have rather than what you are.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know. I go back and forth with it.
I do as well, and it's a really tricky one. There was a really good video by Seb Alex. I don't know if you've seen it, where he talks about those sort of big chains offering vegan options, and his sort of thoughts have changed over time. Initially, he thought it'd be a good thing, supply and demand sort of argument, but his sort of position has changed over time to kind of the sort of more total animal liberation side. Perhaps these sort of big chains just want money. We don't actually really know if they're using that money from the vegan products to invest in more ethical practices. Like, we just don't really know. And interestingly, was it last year or the year before, when Burger King brought out their plant-based burger, the Impossible Burger, their actual sales of the animal-based version went up by quite a bit. So, you'd kind of hope that they went down, but it was actually the opposite effect. So they actually did really well by offering a plant-based version. It's almost like it attracted more people to their restaurant, which is interesting.
Interesting, and certainly, fairly troubling. I think it's often, you often hear that kind of that supply and demand argument, don't you? That we can almost sort of buy our way into a vegan world, and the more I've thought about it, the less I think that's possible.
Yeah, and there is definitely this argument that vegan capitalism, probably won't reach us to total animal liberation, which is the phrase that I tend to use now, because, of course we want, a vegan world, but for all animals to have, basic fundamental freedom and rights, is should be the goal, really. And just capitalism as a sort of system is oppressive by nature. One group tends to get oppressed, whether it's humans getting oppressed financially or through public services and things like this, whereas animals have been oppressed through capitalism for a very long time. So it does make me think, what is the best system to reach that goal? It does make me think.
I really tend to agree with you on that point. The system itself, the system of capitalism, is oppressive by its nature, as you say, and the current system that we've got whether it's non-human animals or humans, there is oppression across the board, and this system supports it and perpetuates it. And I start to sort of then think that on a macro level, like I absolutely agree with that, and I don't think, to the point that you were making, funding KFC or any other, I pick on them, but I could pick on pick on any number of large corporation that's offering a vegan option. I don't think funding any of them is particularly helpful. But there's a sort of like a little niggle in my mind, not necessarily about those big businesses, but about this idea of any form of monetization of veganism is, in some sectors of the community, at least this is my perception, and this may be through the prism of social media and so on, which is always a dangerous way to form any perception, but still, when we think about it from that perspective, I think there is there is a rejection of any kind of monetization of veganism. And then I kind of think, well, as a content creator, I hate that phrase, but as a creator of content in some way, as somebody who's trying to bring conversations that highlight different viewpoints to the world. There seems to be a choice in my mind, certainly, of like, do I try and monetize this thing and then risk that criticism, or do I not monetize it, but at the same time, I have to put food on the table, so I then find a method through an organization that doesn't align with any of my values to monetize my life generally, kind of thing. So I'd love to get your view on that. It's a big point, but monetization of veganism.
It's a massive point, and again, my sort of thinking has changed over the years, and also actually still changes even today. So if I kind of go back, when I first went vegan, I went to this vegan fair in Leeds, and this is back when I didn't really know other vegans. I knew they obviously existed, but in the sort of I just thought they were all just vegan. I didn't realize there were so many different sort of almost categories of veganism and all of this kind of stuff. But there was this guy that did a talk. I can't remember his name, but he was talking about activism and the different sort of forms of activism. And this was my first sort of insight into activism, any sort of activism. And he basically said, in a few words, that you're not really vegan unless you're active. So if you're just vegan on your own, you don't talk about it, you don't sort of question people about their choices. If you're quite quiet, you're sort of basically complicit in the abuse of animals. And he basically said that, and I was like, actually, mate, I'm vegan for the animals. And I kind of felt really angry about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I kind of realized that actually I do need to talk about veganism. And I guess that's what a lot of people have done. And a lot of them have just been able to do it probably at the right time. They've gotten funding from people that think that the way they do it is a really good thing, which means that they've been able to do it. They've been able to dedicate all their time to it. They've been able to make a lot of content around it, and it's reached a lot of people. So in that respect, I think it is really good. But there is also the part of me and a lot of other vegans that think that money can be used in a lot of other places. There are sanctuaries that are really struggling. If we think about what veganism actually is, it's, I guess it's the total liberation of, it should be the total liberation of all animals. And, if sanctuaries are failing and not getting our funding, we are not looking after the non-human animals that we have said that we want to help. So I think there's a big issue in that, and you could argue, should you fund an activist who's doing tours and reaching a lot of people, or should you fund a sanctuary that is basically struggling to buy food and bedding for the animals that they've rescued? So it's definitely a big division within the community, I think. Personally, I've never funded activists. I've tend to more lean towards the sort of sanctuary side, and I think you can visit sanctuaries and you can do a lot of good work by helping look after non-human animals, and I think that's really important.
I'm with you on that. That point around it feels much more direct, doesn't it? If I think about, if I gave £10 to Tower Hill Stables as an example, that money's going to go directly to supporting the life of an animal, and that feels like the right thing to do. I suppose there's an element, if I then go and give that, if I decide, I'm not going to give that £10 directly to Tower Hill, I'm going to give it to this activist because I believe that they will, they are so effective at spreading a message that will, over the longer term, give me, or give the animals ultimately a whole bunch more vegans who'll save 198 animals a year, or whatever the stat is on average. You could go that way, couldn't you, as well, and sort of say, but then it feels very intangible and very long term, and you don't see it directly. So is there an issue there? And then do you I suppose you come back to like capitalism generally. At what point is that person got enough money?
Well, exactly. I mean, there are some activists earning a lot of money, and obviously a lot of that isn't is paying them a salary as well. So part of the funding that they get through Patreon or wherever they get their sort of funding from is directly funding their lifestyle. So at what point does it become unethical, for a vegan activist, to accept a certain amount of money? And there are definitely links to activists with sort of private investment companies that obviously just want I guess a portion of a growing industry. I mean, veganism is a really fast growing market, and it does go back to the point we made about capitalism being solely for profit, really, and in the end a group has to lose, unfortunately. So yeah, I definitely am conflicted in that. I guess through my actions, I've definitely leaned more towards not funding activists directly. If there's a bit of content that I like, I'll definitely share it. I think that's really important. And with social media now, I mean, they can reach hundreds of thousands of people, which isn't a bad thing. It is a really good thing. And without documentaries, I mean, I probably wouldn't have gone vegan if I hadn't have watched documentaries that obviously cost money to make. So it is a really complicated issue, I think.
Do you think there's a danger with the logic of never fund and I'm playing devil's advocate here to some extent. There's two points. Get your view on around this devil's advocate point. One is, do you think there's an element of, if you say it's unethical, and I'm paraphrasing him, pushing it to its conclusion, but if you say it's unethical to fund an activist per se, is there a bit of, well, we almost need to then scrutinize, every vegan's, ins and outs on their bank account, on their balance sheet for the month. And then let's have a look at everything that they've spent that might be unethical or could have gone to Tower Hill Stables or do you know what I mean? Like you could get into a bit of a, if you push that to its logical conclusion, where does it stop? Like, is it, I frivolously bought some calorific, I don't know, cake or whatever, and a coffee from somewhere that cost, I don't know, £5 or £6, and I didn't need it. It wasn't nutritionally particularly beneficial for me. It was just a bit of pleasure in my life. I went and did that, or I went and bought a novel. Probably a better example from a local bookshop, and I didn't need that. It doesn't specifically add anything. Certainly doesn't help any animals. So, is there an element of, if you push it to its logical conclusion, it doesn't, it almost doesn't hold water. It would be better for me to have given that to £5 to X, Y, or Z activist. And I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here because I don't necessarily agree with the point per se, but do you hear where I'm coming from?
No, definitely. It is a really difficult thing to answer because, I probably make purchases in my day-to-day life that, you could argue are not needed. And, that money could be used in a more ethical way to help more non-human animals, whether that's funding an activist or going straight to a sanctuary. So I really, I hate being on the fence really with things, but it's really difficult. There are some people that I follow on social media that are so against activists that are making a lot of money from it. And I would class myself as an activist, but I don't, charge for, my activism. But then you could argue that a lot of these sort of activists that we all know, we could basically just call them content creators because that's basically what they're doing at the moment. They're just getting paid to make content. If you take out the vegan element of it, then there's not so much. It's not so different to any other content creator, really. It is a difficult space, really.
I wonder if that's the challenge, is that the we don't, and probably rightly, but we don't see any value as a society in content created for social media. Even the word content, social media, etc., has sort of coined this phrase content. But if we think about an author or a documentarian or filmmaker of whatever kind or musician, etc., they could be spreading a word, creating a message, but because it's and probably rightly so, because it's of higher value to us culturally, that book, it's okay to monetize that. If I think about, I won't name anyone specifically, but I've had a fair few authors on the podcast over the course of time. Everyone from, they might be making a cookbook to talking on some very, very serious and important subjects. Writing seminal books that have changed sort of vegan culture, certainly, and beyond.
And people, people wouldn't think
content?
twice about buying stuff like that. Vegan cookbooks, they do really well. And if you said to me, people shouldn't buy vegan cookbooks, or those other sort of more, I guess, cultural based books that sort of change the way we see society. you probably wouldn't say, don't buy that because it's helpful, or don't create that. We wouldn't be against people making content like that. But as soon as we shift into the social media realm, the narrative almost changes. And, this sort of, this culture of, almost cancelling it does come about. And I do sort of, sort of dance around that subject of, or these sort of large activists, how do we actually know what they're doing? How many people are they actually making vegan? Like, is that money actually being used effectively? And it does make you think. I mean, I don't know if I won't name the organisation, and it did go around social media quite a bit. But a large outreach organisation was getting, I think it was over $1 million in funding, but they were being really shady with where that money was going. Activists were having to buy their own clothing. They were making a lot of money through the sales, clothing sales, and they weren't really being transparent with how they were funding groups. Organisers were having to fund, the start of their own groups, and that part of it makes me think it's gotten to the point, where it's not really about the message. It's let's get as much funding as possible and make content, because a lot of their sort of their message is through social media content, and it's just repurposed through different platforms. So in that respect, I would say it's not as effective as someone doing direct action or funding a sanctuary. I'd rather them look into who they're giving money to. I think is the important thing.
I think you're right, and that's definitely a point at which my my devil's advocate argument kind of ends. I think is where you have an organisation like that where it's where there is that very shady set of practices going on that you'd think, well, there's no devil's advocate or otherwise justification for that. That seems to be purely around monetization and self-interest, and that at that point you're definitely not not adding a huge amount of value. But I wonder if there's in the world of social media, there's sometimes, as amazing as it has been in terms of a spreading of messages and ideas, I suppose there's many negative sides to that too, but it's been fantastic at being able to spread the word of veganism, of aspect. I mean, if you take, like, I don't know whether it's hunt sabbing or sanctuaries or whatever, the ability to put that information in front of people as to what is going on, or how you can help or whatever is incredible. There's no doubt about it.
I think it's really valuable, especially when you have activists that go into places and put up secret cameras, and that sort of footage would never be seen by people if it wasn't for those activists, but also social media. So I think it has a huge part to play in making it more visible to people, especially things like you mentioned hunt sabbing, and people don't realise that practices like hunting still go on in this country. So for activists to film that and to get good footage around those activities makes people think a bit more and question, I guess, their own choices. If you don't see a slaughterhouse footage, why would you ever question the choices that you're making? Especially now with the sort of consumption of animal products, it's so ingrained in society that most people are just they're born eating animals, and and they don't ever think about, those choices until they see a documentary or a video online or someone talking about it. So I think, social media has a massive role to play in the progress of veganism.
Do you think this? I get your perspective on this, because I wonder whether, as a sort of as an activist, you're thinking about content that you put online. You talk about like slaughterhouse footage is a great example, and that's shocking, and absolutely without people secretly filming and without social media, many people would be blissfully going about their business, buying whatever animal product, seeing the advert with the rolling pastures and so on, and thinking, what a wonderful life this cow or chicken or whatever that I'm about to consume had, and blissfully unaware. They wouldn't realise that. What's your view on, like, and I'm reluctant to even call it activism per se, but would you consider activism to have a much broader sort of church of definition these days, in terms of, you could look at somebody doing, I don't know, health and fitness, or playing a sport, or being I don't know, whatever, a musician, or doing something else that, well, particularly something that wouldn't necessarily be associated with veganism, or would perhaps trigger a different thought in somebody. Do you see that as a form of activism, and do you see it as valuable over, or not even over, but alongside the slaughterhouse footage? Does it all have a place? What's your view?
Oh, yeah, I think it definitely all has a place. People respond to different things. I've gone through stages of changing my message. Like at the beginning, it was very sort of, I guess, quiet. Like I try not to be. I always say to people, don't be apologetic. Don't apologize for people, making unethical choices. Like, we have to be quite firm with it, no matter like which approach you take. Not everyone wants to do direct action. No, not everyone wants to go to a slaughterhouse and film animals going to a truck. That is difficult, and but I do at the same time think people should experience those, experience what the non-human animals go through. But things like, talking about health and fitness, there are lots of people on Instagram that have a huge following, and their content is very much health and fitness based or recipe based. Again, sometimes I question if that's like more of an ego thing. Like, I look at my own feed sometimes and I think, should I really talk about the the sort of slaughterhouse footage more? What is the best approach? And I do question that. But again, social media in its sort of negative form it's very egocentric. People like to talk about themselves, or it's very much appearance based. So if you post a picture of yourself, rather than an animal losing their life, I hate to question which is more popular. So yeah, it is really difficult. I don't know if that's really answered the question, but I try and do a bit of both. I think sometimes even that's quite a hard thing to do, because you want people, I want people to know that I've done activism and that I think it's really important. But I do also want to show people that I like to cook, I like to keep active. If you go vegan, those things don't have to change. You can still enjoy cooking. You can still be active. You can still be, a professional athlete if you want. There are professional athletes that are vegan. That doesn't have to change. So I do think it's important for anyone, once they've decided that they're vegan, that they need to talk about it in some way, and not to be apologetic. I think that's like really important. That's one thing I've seen online quite a bit is, like sort of comment threads, people apologizing for people not yet being vegan, but like we said earlier, that like footage is so available now. I question people when, if they have seen slaughterhouse footage, why would they not go vegan? If I put that in any other scenario, people would question it. If I use extreme examples, if I don't know, in this country, if I showed someone, a dog being served up, there wouldn't even be a debate around it. It would be, that is absolutely wrong. How can people do that? But, I do question people that still continue to make unethical choices when they have seen, cows being killed or chickens being killed or, baby male chicks being ground up alive. Like, I do really have to question people around that.
Yeah, I'm with you now. I'm probably on the other side of the debate. Because I sometimes think about this, like, because I hold the same sort of view, and like similarly to you, like the journey to get to veganism. Certainly at the end of it, like the conscious journey, shall we say, to get to veganism, because I think there must have been something subconsciously going on prior to that. But it was like a 24-hour kind of like watch Cowspiracy, right, you're done sort of thing. Like, like there's no logical argument for that. Why would I go about doing that anymore? I thought I was, I thought I was an environmentalist. I sort of hesitate around the word because I feel like you hold yourself to that ideal, and when you live in sort of Western culture, it's pretty difficult to argue that you are, even if you are vegan, because there's much sort of destruction in our lifestyles. But it was a 24-hour kind of journey. But I often wrestle with the idea that sort of that was 3.5 years ago. So 3 years, 6 months, and 2 days ago, I may have stumbled past some slaughterhouse footage on social media and turned off my phone or closed down the app and ignored it, or said, or something in my head said, I'm not ready to deal with that. And so I guess there is a bit of a, I don't know, once we're on the other side of the debate, we then sort of see it as it's completely illogical. But yet we were probably in that space ourselves. I do sort of wrestle with that a little bit.
I'm definitely with you on that. Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. Like, obviously we see it very differently now because we have made that choice. And, I always think, like, before I went vegan, I probably still considered myself a good person. I try to make good choices. I try to treat people with respect. I try to be kind to people, and friendly and all those things. But, some of my choices, dietary, obviously veganism goes further than just food, but they weren't good. They weren't ethical choices. It's as simple as that. So part of me now does think about that quite a bit. At what point does someone become ready to go vegan? Isn't it like, can you just make excuses? Like, I'm not ready, just because they don't want to go vegan. Like, do people really have to think about it? For us in our examples, we saw, a couple of documentaries and that was it. So for us, it was quite a quick thing, but some people take, quite a long time, to that. And I hate calling veganism a journey. I really don't like doing that. With any other forms of repression, we don't accept the fact that people can have a journey towards the sort of anti-oppression side of it. If I'm
no one goes on an anti-racist journey.
Yeah, exactly. You're either
it took me
racist
2 years
or
to stop being racist. It would be, yeah, it would be insane.
It
To
just
say
wouldn't be
something like that.
accepted, would it? If you told your
No.
friends and family that I'm on a journey to being anti sexist, at the moment I am kind of a bit sexist, but I'm kind of giving myself 6 months to to change my views. I think people would have a real problem with it.
It's just on a Friday now that I'm sexist. As a family, we don't do any sexism now Monday through Thursday. It's just Fridays.
And this is the other argument, like that goes to the point with meatless Mondays, and how helpful is that? Is that just a way for people to feel a bit better? It's like the free range egg example, like it just eases people's conscience into thinking that I'm doing better than most people, but I'm not ready or willing to make the full change. And I think that's where the vegan community has to maybe work a bit harder, is to make veganism not seem like this really intense thing. And I think the community is quite divided. When people see vegan activists, they think that's really extreme. I kind of thought that. I used to say things like, "Oh, I'm not one of those vegans. I'm not a preachy vegan." It's a real dilemma for people, I think, especially when they first go vegan.
It's I suppose that the challenge though is, and the thing I really worry about, particularly as a dad of he's very small at the moment as a little chap, so I've got probably a few years before I have to really worry about this. But what I really worry about though is that if I think about this is actually the sort of anniversary of this podcast. So I've done 52 episodes. This is the 52nd. Conversations with all kinds of different folks, and what I know now is way further along the line than what I knew then. If I think about a conversation with somebody like Carol Adams only a couple of weeks ago, even then, the door was open to a whole new set of I guess views, ways of doing things, perspectives on the world that I just never thought about. I'd never understood, and I'm now, and I agree with all of them. But I'm learning. I'm on a learning sort of. It was almost a journey, but I'm on that learning curve, and I suppose what I worry about as a parent is that is there room for learning journeys? I've used the word, sorry, but is there room for people to get things wrong and do things, support somebody that perhaps they didn't realise, like what I mean. I'd caveat that with, once you do realise something, there needs to be a point at which it's like, well, if you keep seeing something and you're not doing anything about it, then you're complicit. But if you're mistakenly kind of just not aware of something and somebody points it out to you, and then you go, oh wow, I didn't realise. But I just wonder whether social media even affords you that opportunity. It's like, as soon as you've done something wrong, are you now out?
No, I think that's a really good point. Like, when I've, the time that I've been vegan, I've tried to do as much learning as possible. And like you, I'm probably on that sort of learning journey as well. And I think that's necessary. Things change, society shifts, viewpoints shift. And I think it's really important to educate ourselves on different viewpoints and just to have a wider understanding of the issues. There's things that I've spoken to people about, when I've done activism, different types of activism, whether it's outreach or more sort of direct activism things. People have different views, and I think people send you down different paths, and I think you have to definitely educate yourself But like you said, people, once people have seen, whether it's slaughterhouse footage or anything like that, I think people, I think people have a obligation to look into that at least, and to actually really seriously consider making, more ethical choices. And I go back to, and this is going to, this could be very controversial, and I saw this on a friend of mine's Instagram story last night, and it was in response to the new David Attenborough film on Netflix, I think. I haven't watched it yet. And he does talk about the need for people to move towards a more plant-based lifestyle, which is good. But however, people are arguing that, he can't really tell people, make documentaries like this when he is complicit in making certain dietary choices himself. Should he be completely vegan? If he's going to say things that, would suggest people need to make better choices. And I just thought that was really interesting, a really popular person being called out, Just thought that was quite interesting.
No, it really is that one. Like, absolutely. I've seen many quotes, and from that documentary specifically, and like you, I'm very hesitant to say anything, anything the slightest bit negative about David Attenborough, because I feel like it would be, sacrosanct to some sort of, I don't know, heresy or something. I don't know, but I don't think we'd go down well with it with people. But,
yeah.
but with the same token, I've definitely had that thought of, like a really prominent, environmentalist in the mainstream with the platform that he's got at 94 decides to say you should think about going plant-based, when that information's been there for quite a long time. And I sometimes think, I go back to, I saw Fiona Oakes talk at the Reading Vegan Festival. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, and it's actually one of the podcast episodes. I was lucky enough to have captured the audio, and with the good folks at Reading Vegan Festival agreed for it to be put out as an episode, because it's very, I think what she had to say was very important. But she talks about going on BBC Breakfast to talk about one of her world records that she'd achieved for long distance marathon running. For those of you who don't know, Tower Hill Stables is run by Fiona and her partner Martin, and funded in large part by her taking part in these long distance events, Marathon des Sables, etc. And she mentions on there going on BBC Breakfast and them asking her not to talk about the fact that she was vegan. So they were happy with the animal sanctuary, and they were happy with the Guinness World Records bit. So you're running to raise money, and she basically did it anyway, because she's Fiona Oakes, and she does what she likes, and she does the right thing. But it does make me think. We've got many people who are mainstream environmentalists. We talk about David Attenborough there, and I wonder whether he wouldn't have been allowed to have said anything.
Yeah, and this is it. Like, it's if that is the case, it's it's not great for the non-human animals. It does present a bit of an issue. I think the media, the mainstream media, is very much still in the hands of those sort of, I guess, the majority. So obviously veganism is still a minority movement, but again, it's, veganism is a big talking point for them. So they do get a lot of, views and clicks and things. So surprised they haven't really latched onto it more than I thought they would have. Obviously, when Piers Morgan talks about vegan sausage rolls and stuff, that kind of kicks things off a bit.
It feels like we've had to have got it to a point where it's palatable enough to say, oh, you might want to consider going plant-based, and even that's taken years,
a long time. And plant-based is still, you're not fully, you haven't fully taken yourself out of the exploitation of animals. You're still,
absolutely not. It's just about diet, right?
Yeah, exactly. I could eat, vegan 6 days a week, and on the 7th day, I still, have animal products. I could still wear leather. I could still buy, cosmetic products that are tested on animals. So it's
like the word flexitarian.
Yeah,
it's a really big bugbear of mine.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it literally means nothing. It just means I do whatever I like.
Exactly. I think those sort of things are quite damaging to what veganism actually is. And sometimes I do people do have almost a negative connotation towards the word vegan. So it is a challenge to kind of shift that sort of thinking, really.
Yeah, totally. I kind of feel like all of it is just not happening with the urgency that it's needed from even if we're not talking directly total animal liberation, but we're talking about climate change, and we're talking about,
definitely,
the urgency that's required. I don't know, if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have probably said, we need to, and I'm probably going back and forth, on my own arguments within this podcast, but, I'd have probably said, it takes a million types of activists and so on and so forth. And I don't know whether it's losing patience or seeing some of the challenges around climate change, just seeing them in very real terms around the world, like we think about Australian bushfires in January of this year. We've kind of almost completely forgotten that was a huge thing that had happened, with the pandemic, etc. But, in January of this year, millions of animals, etc., losing their lives. And I sometimes think, have we got time to slowly, try and in part buy our way into it through an option in a fast food restaurant, and in part go meatless on a Monday, and in part, like this person is a Formula One driver, and they were a great example to people, and have we got time for any of that?
I do.
But I really don't know what the solution is.
No, and I've had this conversation with a few friends of mine, and a lot of them say, the likelihood that we have a vegan world in our lifetime is probably slim. Just the scale of the animal agriculture industry it's just huge. I think it's something like 40,000 animals get killed every second across the globe. So the scale is just absolutely enormous, and that's just animals for food. That's not taken into account like cosmetics and entertainment, and all the other sort of intricacies that you don't actually realize. But it could go down to what energy supplier you're with. They're not all vegan friendly. So it's a huge thing. So yeah, I think there's definitely an urgency. Sometimes I feel, like I could be a bit harsher in my message, but people get really defensive when you question their actions, I think.
Well, that's the flip side, isn't it?
It's the massive flip
challenge,
side.
is you think, we haven't got the time, but then I see, and you look at somebody like, say, Greta Thunberg, and she's done, incredible things for raising the agenda, but at the same time is parodied and ridiculed as,
I know.
Angry young girl. What does she know?
Yeah,
she doesn't
Message,
understand.
her message is quite strong.
Yeah,
it's powerful.
But rightly so.
Exactly.
But I caught a bit of and I know it's obviously satire and it's funny and so on. But I was watching. There's a new series of Spitting Image. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the first time Spitting Image was out.
Yeah.
But there's a new series of it, and they've got a Greta Thunberg character who, a parody of Greta Thunberg, and she's the weather person, and all she says pretty much is it's hot. When they go to her for the weather, and she says it's hot in a very angry voice, and it's funny.
Yeah.
It's like if it wasn't like we were staring down the sort of the barrel of abyss, I probably it probably would be funny, but it's well, it wouldn't. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But with the same token, it's like when we're in the system we're in, you post a picture of, I don't know, somebody's done a X workout, and you will get 200, 300, 400,000, whatever it is, likes, whatever your size of audience, whatever large number of likes is for you, you'll get a lot of them when you post that, or a great looking dinner versus take a look at this. This is the facts of climate change, for example. And so that it's like, well, what do you do? Do you go with the do you try and fight it through the algorithm? And then put in a nice picture of the dinner or whatever, and try and slip under the radar. But I don't know.
I don't know what the right thing is.
To smash the system,
and
it's not working clearly.
Yeah, and this is why I think I always sort of gravitate towards direct action. If you look at it on like a macro scale, I've had conversations with people on Instagram, people with quite large followings that don't really think direct action is, I guess, the way forward. I think because it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and for larger audiences, I think it puts people off. However, for me personally, I can do it, whatever that sort of direct action might be. I feel like I can see the impact that I'm making, and I can see the difference straight firsthand. That might also be going to a sanctuary and helping. I think people forget like they can do that, and they that's a really valuable work. I do question the sort of urgency, especially people with really large followings that don't really talk about the actual important points. They're just posting videos of their workouts, and I've been guilty of that as well. Like, don't get me wrong, I've done that. Or posted a post-workout picture, which again I've done. And I question this sort of the helpfulness of it if we just look at veganism, sort of the goal of veganism. It's a really difficult one. It's sort of, do I post what I want to post because it's my feed? If I'm a content, or someone's a larger content creator, should they just create what they want, or should they create what's necessary? It's a really difficult one, which I think sometimes I don't feel like I have the answer to. And again, it's going back to that sort of that sort of learning and education and talking to different people. People have different views, and even talking to you today, it's made me think, and it's actually made me excited to think about my own sort of direct action or other forms of activism that I can do. And there's different groups being set up all the time. So I think it's just being a bit creative with it as well.
I think that's a great place to leave it on that question, because I'm not sure we're going to get the answer with that. It's a big old question, but I love your point around take action, do something, whatever it is. I also love that point that you make there about because I think for some people, and I'll probably count myself amongst these that being a bit sort of a bit of personal disclosure. I think the very thought of hunt sabbing as an example, or even like volunteering for Sea Shepherd, like on the front line. I'm in awe of those sorts of people, but I'm not sure I've got the sort of the mental fortitude to do it.
And that's that's really common, and I don't think we should put everyone in the same bracket. People have different skills, and like you said, the mental fortitude, and the sort of desire to do things is different between people. I think we do have to be flexible in what people do. But like you said, I think we have to do something. Whatever it is that you decide to do, it has to be meaningful, unapologetic, which I always go to. And just do it with passion.
I love that, Shaun. That's perfect. Let's wrap it up there.
Sounds good, man.
A great final sentiment. Thanks for your time, Shaun.
No, it's been a pleasure.
It's been lovely chatting to you.
No, it's been really good, man.
We'll do it again soon, mate.
Yeah, we'll chat again.